Well, here I am again with another dangerous dinosaur. We took a bit of hiatus because there was a time that I was unable to really do any podcast or video cast or anything else because of various health problems. Now, I'm not doing this for sympathy for my health problems. And anybody that's going to say, oh, I'm sorry for this or I'm sorry for that, I want you to stop viewing me right now. I'm adjusting the screen, by the way, and go do something else. Because I'm talking about what happened with my hospitalizations, not for sympathy or anything like that, but to make a point, and to make a point that needs to be made regarding my research and commentary on some artificial intelligence. So let me give you some background information here. I've been hospitalized for various lung problems since right after Christmas. So right after Christmas, I felt ill. I got taken to the emergency room because I couldn't breathe. I had real bad problem breathing. I go into the emergency room and I do a bit of a temper tantrum at the nurse or whomever is there at the computer taking the admittance data or information. She's typing on a little computer keyboard that goes into a computer that enters the definitions and the information that are given her. It's filling out a form, essentially. Now, I've got this mask on because they're under the COVID rules, and everybody that goes in there had to wear a mask. But if you've got breathing problems, breath problems, which turned out that I did, it's a real problem when you've got a mask on because it's hard to breathe. So this woman is at the computer keyboard, and I said, can I pull my mask out a little bit so I can breathe here? She says, just a minute, I'm filling out this form. Now, it occurred to me, first off, she's an RN, and it occurred to me that nurses are supposed to be trained to look out for patient comfort first, and it wouldn't have hurt for a yes or no, can I pull my mask out a ways, rather than to say, I'm busy filling out the computer thing, so shut the hell up, which is essentially what she did. And so my interpretation was, I don't want to bother with you because I've got to fill out my forms, which then interpreted me or caused me to believe that the forms were more important to her than the patient health or patient comfort or anything else. So she viewed her job mainly as filling out forms. Now, why do we send somebody for higher education beyond high school for special training to be a nurse, to fill out and do what I used to have typists do? And I surely never paid typists the kind of salary that they pay nurses. So why are we paying them to type into a machine, or data entry is what we call it? Anyway, I get the data entry going, and I'm a little pissed off and show that I'm reluctant to go back there to the emergency room because I got this gut feeling, if this is the way the emergency people are behaving, I don't know whether I want them to treat me or not, because you got to wonder if they're treating you for your best interest. Anyway, I go back to the emergency room, and it's in the morning, and I haven't had breakfast. I'm on 18 various pills in the day, 3 inhalers and things like this. And I was in a lot of respiratory distress, and I needed some inhalers or something at least. I also had really high edema in the legs. So the emergency room nurses take vital signs again, blood pressure, all this kind of stuff. They put a thing into me so they can do IV things. And they tape that thing to my wrist so that I always got a spigot that they can put shit into. That's standard procedure apparently for operating rooms. Anyway, I got the spigot in, and the initial thing, and eventually a doctor's coming to interview me. They put me on oxygen, and I'm still distressed, so they give me some albuterol intravenously, and they also give me a bunch of Lasix because they claim I had congestive heart failure. Well, they drained a lot of fluid off my legs, probably a couple pounds, and also got my lungs working, or at least my respiratory system, where I wasn't gasping for air. Then they came in and gave a lot of tests. I also said I hadn't had breakfast and I'm diabetic and I'm on insulin. And I had low insulin back then. I think I tested at about 80 and it was probably dropping lower. So I ordered breakfast. I didn't get breakfast or anything at all till 10 o'clock that evening, which it seems to me for a diabetic that's pretty harsh. In any event, they do all these tests and they come back and they said, you've got pneumonia. Well, I suspected I had, so it wasn't any big news. But they also said I had RSV virus, and they were going to hospitalize me. Well, RSV was sort of the virus of the day after COVID-19, and it constituted an infectious disease, and it also constituted confinement or quarantine into an isolation room. So finally a room opens up, they wheel me off to isolation. Isolation means that anybody coming into my room has to put another gown and mask on. And they have to do that out in the hall, and every time they go back out in the hall they got to take it off, and they got to change costumes every time they come in. So they put the one robe over the their other gown, and they put a mask on. Some of them even wear face masks, and it's a big Cecil B. DeMille production, which takes them a while to get into the room. Now, when you have COPD, as I do, underlying condition, and then you put pneumonia on top of that, and put RSV on top of that, it gets to be real serious. The other thing that I had was something bowel syndrome, which in plain English means I had the shits. So I go into this room and they put this alarm thing on because I'm of my age and they think I might be a fall risk. Now, it was sensitive, and because I had the lung problems and couldn't breathe, I wanted to sit up on my bed because if I laid down I couldn't breathe and I went into distress. And it's hard for me to describe the distress you feel under such circumstances, but it's like you're drowning, and when you're drowning you got to fight to keep from drowning, and you have this psychological thing that they're drowning. And one of the things they teach you to do is use what they call an albuterol and they call it a rescue inhaler. So you're taught to hold the rescue inhaler and keep a rescue inhaler with you. So if you get into some kind of respiratory distress, you could use the rescue inhaler and at least come out of the distress. So I have my rescue inhaler there, and I don't lie down, and I'm sitting at the edge of my seat with a case of diarrhea and also the various lung problems. Also, I get to squirm a little bit because I'm sitting on the edge of the bed because I can't lay down on the edge of the bed because it's hard on me. So, every time I moved, the alarm would go off and the nurses would have to suit up and then come in the room and say, what's the matter? Well, I also, every time I had to go to the bathroom, I had to call them. And by the time they got suited up and everything, it was too late. So it was kind of a messy proposition for them, and I felt sorry for them. I said, why don't you take the pad off? I can't call you every time I have to go to the bathroom because you'll never get here in time, and let me try it as best I can. Also, I'm not a fall risk. I have never fallen since I've been on oxygen, which has been probably 15 years, and I generally use a cane, and I can get around quite well with a cane, but I see a walker over there. I promise I'll use the walker when I go to the bathroom if you let me go, and take this goddamn uh, alarm out from underneath me, so every time I shift on the bed it doesn't send off the alarm, because they probably hadn't heard of the Proverbs because they were younger people. But when I grew up, my grandfather told me that, and my father even told me the parable of the boy that cried wolf. And the thing, if you cry wolf often enough, people are used to you crying wolf, and they ignore your cry of the wolf. So when a wolf does come to eat you and you cry wolf, nobody will come because you've cried wolf so often that they're used to the false alarm. Psychologists got a term for this too, and it's on associations. And it goes like this: if a dog's out in the field and all of a sudden it lifts its leg to pee, and you throw a T-bone steak at it, and it gobbles the T-bone steak, it associates lifting its leg to pee with a T-bone steak. So it will go around lifting its leg expecting a T-bone steak, and it doesn't get it, but there's a false association there. So here's the situation I'm in. I'm in a COVID ward. I've got RSV. I've got a real dangerous virus. I'm having trouble breathing. I have pneumonia with the RSV, and occasionally I think like I'm going to die or drown. The other thing is you get so panicked you lose all rationality, and I act out, I act panically, like somebody drowning in a swimming pool. Sometimes you go in to rescue them, you got to knock them out because they get frantic. I was frantic. However, for some reason the nurses weren't trained to deal with that. So they put all my medication, including my rescue inhaler, under lock and key. So if I was feeling like I was drowning, I would hit the button, and they would come as soon as they got done filling out their forms or whatever the hell they were doing at the front desk. Sometimes it would take as much as 5 or 10 minutes. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm suffocating, like I'm dying. I'm looking for a knife so I can slash my wrist or whatever. It's a real traumatic experience. They finally get suited up with their costumes. They get their mask on. They come in. They say, "What's the matter?" I say, "I can't breathe. I need an inhaler." Or it's time for nebulizer treatment. We'll get into that later. Finally, I can get an inhaler and I can take a puff and I can relax a little bit because I'm not drowning anymore. I'm just uncomfortable as hell. And I explained that I'd like to have the inhaler handy because then I could take a whiff and I wouldn't have to go through all of this shit and call them in here on an emergency all the time. And your emergency, your view of emergency and my view of emergencies are different. Your emergency response time is probably like the police, 10 to 15 minutes, and you call it successful. Well, if there's a burglar or murder in your house, 10 or 15 minutes makes it too late. So if I'm drowning or had diarrhea or whatever, their response time made the whole issue moot. Well, this went on for a day or two while I was there. Finally, they agreed to remove the alarm from the bed because it was going off every time I moved, almost every time I farted, but it didn't go off. It wasn't that sensitive. And I convinced them that I could get around. So we made a deal that I could use my walker as long as I got up, and told them I was using the walker, etc. Well, then we also made a deal I could keep my inhaler, whether it was a psychological crutch or not. The other problem was that all of the data was entered into the computer, and one of the things that was prescribed was a nebulizer treatment. The label on the nebulizer says administer every 6 hours, but that was FDA guidance from the labeling rather than discretionary use of the albuterol, either as a nebulizer or inhaler. Now, if any of you are not following this, please ask the questions and I'll try to answer it on the question and answer theory. And remember, I'm not doing this to garner sympathy. It's coming on the topic of my series here of my hospital stays as how artificial intelligence is going to kill us all, which I think is a real serious problem, and I'm using this as an example of how it can happen. So we get in there, and after 7 or 8 days, they figure I'm cured. They don't take a parting x-ray, but they say, oh, the intravenous drugs that you've been on cured the virus, or you no longer have it, and the pneumonia should be gone. So take off and check with your primary care doctor. So the other thing is, when I got up to the room at 10 o'clock at night, they brought my breakfast in that was ordered at 10 o'clock in the morning. And of course the eggs were cold. But they did have a way of giving me a ham sandwich or a turkey sandwich or something. I forget now what it was. And I would ask for other things in food, etc. And they had to wait for the doctor's orders. And the doctor's orders are probably standardized, and they're making a checklist on the computer form. And it's whenever the doctor gets to do it in the computer form that he'll do it. And they do it by the way of their examination in the room. So the examination in the room said I had all of these things plus RSV virus. Now, they came in. You can't get much sleep in the hospital because they kept coming in taking what they call vital signs. So every so often they came in and took my blood pressure, they took my oxygen level, they drew blood, they poked me, they wanted to do blood samples before they fed me to see where my blood sugar was, and all of this kind of stuff. You get used to the routine and you sort of know what it is. And being a diabetic as long as I have, being on insulin as long as I have, I pretty much know the routine for that. I'd been off the short term, and they decided I ought to be on both terms, because I had also been on prednisone for various lung distress for, at that time, probably 30 days before I got admitted the first time to the hospital. And I was on high dosage of prednisone. That was another reason that the blood sugar tests were up, because prednisone will raise the blood sugar result. But they know all this, and it goes into their little computer thing, and they calculate things, and they sit there entering this, that, and the other data into the computer thing, and the computer is supposed to tell them what to do. In any event, I get released from the hospital. I'm feeling pretty good, but all of a sudden I'm starting to get better. So I'm released on Friday, and I see my primary care doctor on Monday, and by the time I get to the primary care doctor, I'm not feeling so well, and as I leave, he says, well, let's get an x-ray just to make sure things are okay. Well, he calls me the next day, and the x-ray says, well, it shows that your pneumonia is still there. So obviously the doxycycline didn't kill the pneumonia. And he says, if it's not, continue the doxycycline. If it's not better, go to the emergency room, etc. Well, it didn't get better, and it got worse. So it was back to the emergency room. I go in there, and they remember me, and they gave me Lasix again to take the water off. And that was the other thing, is because my legs, the edema was so bad in my legs, and they took a couple quarts of water off. They diagnosed me also as having congestive heart failure. So I had congestive heart failure since the first trip, and I guess I'd had it before, but nobody really diagnosed it ever since I had the edema. And some of the stuff was getting helped by the prednisone, but some of it was irritated. It was a takeoff. I could breathe better with the prednisone, but it was also acting as an agent of adding fluid to the lungs and the chest. So we had all kinds of prednisone and Lasix given intravenously, working with each other. And they said I had to take another virus test. So they come in there with the virus test after 6 or so hours sitting there. And they said, oh, we can't let you leave. You've got COVID-19 now. And I said, how the hell could I have caught that? The only place I'd been is to the doctor's office and in here. And also, why do I still have pneumonia? What happened? Did you release me too soon? No, we cured it. This is a new form of pneumonia, and this is a new disease. You got it probably at your doctor's office or whatever. Um, I was in no condition to argue because felt like I was really dying then. I couldn't breathe. So I went through the whole regimen, and because it was diagnosed as COVID-19, it was back to the isolation room. Now, they also have a rule that they can't feed you until the doctor puts in his orders. And the doctor that diagnosed me downstairs obviously didn't look at the chart from the prior admission. So he went through all the thing with congestive heart failure, pneumonia, etc., 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 and he forgot to talk about the diet. Now, the first instance that I was there, one of the doctors came in and said because of this, that the other, they had to do a heart test and do an echocardiogram. So halfway through that, they did the echocardiogram, and because the last person to see me was a cardiologist, they put me on a heart diet, which I hadn't been on, which the previous doctor hadn't put me on, which I had to complain about because I wasn't a cardiac patient, but the automated system said if the cardiologist treated you, you automatically went on a cardiac diet. So it took me a day and a half to straighten that out and get back on the regular diet. And the next thing I know, I'm back into an argument with them on the food. In any event, I was tired of ordering food and having it get cold. And what was happening is the cafeteria or whatever bring the food by, and because I was in the isolation room, they had to get the nurses to bring it in so they could gown up. The other thing is they had to take my blood sugar so they could know how much insulin to give me before the meals, etc. So I was dependent on eating on the insulin, etc., which depended on when the nurses would come in there and do all their little tests, which depended on when they completed their computer assignments. In any event, there was one day when the food came down. My wife, Arlene, came to visit me, and as she was leaving, the food was brought down and put in front of my door. Now, she had walked to the hospital at that time to visit because we live very close to Boulder Community Hospital. She left the hospital with the tray outside and on foot got between the hospital and the YMCA at Mapleton and 28th Street and called me on the telephone. And she said, "Have you eaten yet?" And I said, "No. The tray's still sitting out there. Nobody's brought it in." So at that time I figured it had been quite a while, and if she could walk from the hospital to the YMCA, that's quite a ways, and she wasn't running anything or running like the Boulder or in a marathon. She was just walking. So I called the nurse's station and I said, "Where the hell's my lunch?" They answered, "I'll find out from your nurse, but I'll do it more politely and won't use that language." Now, it's kind of galling for an 80-year-old man to be corrected by a 25-year-old woman on saying, "Where the hell's my lunch?" And they sort of missed the point. The point was my lunch was probably cold. It was meatloaf, I think, of that day. And it had sat outside for at least half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. and hadn't brought in because nobody had put the special gown and mask on to bring it in there because they were so busy filling out the forms on the computer. Meanwhile, particularly with diabetics, you don't want to let the blood sugar get too low, but that's what was happening. So the end result or the conclusion of that kind of behavior is the fact that it's not in the patient's best interest. You don't let a diabetic, after you take his blood test and see that the blood level is low, wait for an hour for his food. In any event, they bring the tray in finally. And I stood corrected because I used damn. And it's very interesting because by the time I was a freshman in high school, probably before that because we had junior high and high school in the same building back then, I knew what damn was and son of a bitch and a few other things. And I'd heard them my whole life, and you got used to them and didn't get offended. So you wonder where these people right out of their teens come off correcting somebody for saying something like damn, particularly, or where the hell's my food? What am I supposed to be? Grateful? I'm supposed to be on my knees thanking him that they give me a sandwich, even though it causes my blood pressure to go low, even though it's annoying, even this, that, or the other. Or I'm in the COVID ward and I've got lung disease and I can't breathe. I got all these problems. Their priority isn't making me feel better. It's correcting my grammar or my language because it's not adequately proper. So anyway, the next day it happens and the food's cold again, and I tell them I'm not going to eat it. So they have a powwow, and they get sort of some administrators in there, and the administrators come in, and they say, well, what's the matter, Dennis? I said, I'm on strike. I'm going to do a food strike until you fuckers feed me right and not let my lunches sit in the hall for a goddamn hour before I get it. So we go through the whole thing, and we square that away. We also, at the same time, square away the fact that I need, because I'm neurotic or whatever, that I should have an inhaler. That's a rescue inhaler, and it's called a rescue inhaler for a certain reason. I should have that at my bedside, and a few things like that. So the rest of my stay is pretty good. Everything's going smooth, and I get released. And lo and behold, after a week, I have to go back because I can't breathe. And this time I'm diagnosed again with pneumonia. So I've had pneumonia for about a month now. And this time I have something like another virus called Humanus or Humanus something. I can't recall the name of it. And we go through the same thing. Now, by now, I know pretty much what the routine is, why the routine is what it is, what the nurses do on their stations, what they don't do, etc., etc., etc. And the third time I was there was all kinds of data. Or excuse me, the third time I was there. There's all kinds of data that should have been in the machine. And what I recognized there is, although I'd been there twice within a 6-week period, that the doctors and nurses didn't consult the results of the other 2 admissions. So we had to go through the negotiations with the albuterol, with the food and everything else a third time. And I'm sitting here, why in the hell do we have to go through it a third time? And it dawns on me, they would say this, that, and the other. I say, well, don't you read the chart? I'm assuming they read the total chart. What becomes obvious is they read the chart from just the local admission of the last time. Had they read the charts from the prior admissions and put 2 and 2 together, or in this case 2 and 2 and 2, the 2 and 2 and 2 would come up 6, the 2 and 2 would come up 4, but they had neither one of those. So all they had there was the conclusion of 2. And we went through the whole training part again. And the reason is which for that is that they used the computer and relied on the data put in the computer and didn't rely on any common sense. But as one of my colleagues from Carnegie Mellon in artificial intelligence commented this morning, the problem is that they are also afraid of the computers. They are commanded by the computers. They don't use computers as an aid. They use them as a commanding officer. They pay deference to the computer. And that's where we're going now. So the next 3 parts of this series is my breakdown on how computers, programmed learning, machine learning, and artificial intelligence can kill us all if we don't start using our brains. So please comment on this, because to me it's important. If you don't think it's important, go away. But I would like a lot of feedback on this. I wouldn't mind if this thing went viral for you guys and get my series viral. Get on it and recommend this to others that are interested in this project, because I'm going to give some pretty good insights into the whole thing. I even, while I was in the hospital, gave a poll. I put out on my Facebook page the fact that I was being denied medical treatment, which we got 60 responses to, and things like this. So it will be kind of an interesting, I think, an interesting expose or commentary on modern day medicine, and it might save your life. So this is the dangerous dinosaur checking out until next time.